So, next section is legal differences in China. For legal differences in China, I want to look at 4 different aspects. First is the idea of what may be the law and how the law may be enforced. So legislation versus enforcement. Next, regional differences. So it's worth being aware that in China, the laws are not always exactly the same from one place to another. It's probably something that people from the United States are fairly familiar with, but it'd be less familiar to somebody like me. I also want to highlight where the big differences in the laws exist. This won't be an exhaustive list, but it will be, the major areas where I think it's worth highlighting differences between Chinese law and Western law, or laws from your own country. And then finally, I want to make some recommendations for how to act and behave to keep yourself really on the right side of the law. So, legislation versus enforcement. Use this picture because it's something you're probably going to see a lot of in China. Somebody smoking right next to a no smoking sign. The law in Shenzhen and Guangzhou and many of the first tier cities in China is that you can't smoke in a restaurant. However, I almost guarantee that at some point you'll be in a restaurant and someone will light a cigarette, because it's really quite a common thing to see, and aspects of Chinese culture and tradition sort of dictate that people aren't going to challenge other people about this. Another area where you're going to see people smoking is in toilets, especially the male toilets. And it's really, again, there'll often be signs up saying don't smoke here, but people don't tend to challenge this. And there doesn't tend to be anybody going around enforcing this. So whilst the law may say one thing, or say rules in a particular shopping mall might say please don't smoke in this area, there's very little enforcement to control that. And this can be seen in many different areas of life in China. So another area where you'll see this a lot is in terms of traffic control, traffic rules, regulations. So this is a picture from somewhere in China. I don't know that it's in Shenzhen. I can't read the number plate. But here I think we've got 6 people on what could be an electric bike. It might be a motorbike, it might be an electric bike, but that's almost certainly illegal. And you'll see lots of different things happening on the roads that will be instinctively unacceptable to you. People going through red lights, people pulling out of lanes without indicating, people turning corners without indicating, people putting their hazard lights on and just stopping in the middle of the road. And you'll also see a lot of people on their mobile phones, speaking into their mobile phones on their WeChat, or sending messages on their WeChat whilst they drive along big roads at very slow speeds, because they've stopped concentrating on their driving and they're just concentrating on their phone. And this is quite common behavior, and one of the reasons why you see it so often is it's to some extent tolerated by other users of the road, or it's, in the case of smoking, tolerated by other people who are in the restaurant, or by the waitress or the manager of the restaurant. Or in terms of the police, there isn't a huge amount of enforcement. I'm not seeking to criticize that in any way, but merely to present what is the actual situation in China. So it's something to be aware of, and it really sets the scene for what is a country that does have a lot of regulations. Traffic laws are actually very good and very thorough in China, but a lot of people don't drive to that standard. And there are various other laws, but because the enforcement and perhaps the support in terms of legal counsel and so on is not as comprehensive as it is in more developed nations, you'll see a slightly more chaotic situation. So it can give you some background, some understanding of why you walk along the street and you'll see things that are not acceptable in the West, but are fairly commonplace here. Here we're talking about regional differences. So this is a picture of Shenzhen. Why have I chosen Shenzhen? Shenzhen is different from other cities. In terms of the powers that it has, it is just below the level of a provincial government. So it has the power to set its own laws in many different areas. And I'm going to use traffic example again. So if we consider these three different forms of transport, first one here is a bicycle. Quite a lot of bicycles in Shenzhen, especially now that we have these shared bicycle schemes like Mobike and Ofo. And this, for me here, is supposed to represent a scooter, so a light motorbike, a small motorbike. And then here, something much bigger. Now, Shenzhen actually has a city-wide ban on small motorbike. So anything like this scooter would not be accepted inside Shenzhen city. The reason for doing this is mainly to control the traffic on the roads that would get in the way of cars, and also, protect pedestrians from motorbikes that jump the lights and this kind of behavior that can be rather disruptive. What vehicles are actually allowed on the roads? So if we look here, bicycles are fine, but it's worth stressing this is for small roads. So a city like Shenzhen has several very big roads, sometimes with 4 or 5 lanes. And as a rule of thumb, if a road has 2 lanes going either direction in Shenzhen, you're probably best not to be cycling on that road. I've been stopped on a number of occasions cycling on roads that have 2 lanes going in either direction, and the police have told me to cycle on the pavement. I tried to point out the impracticality of cycling on the pavement, but they weren't really interested. They just said, you need to cycle on the pavement. So that's worth being aware of. So stick to single lane or single lane in either direction, and you'll be fine with bicycles. In general, you'll be tolerated on the pavement, but of course, watch out for other cyclists and pedestrians. These scooters, well, as I just said, small motorbikes are completely banned in Shenzhen. No small motorbikes at all. Now, just as I've said before, legislation and enforcement are 2 different things, and you will see small motorbikes in Shenzhen, but they shouldn't really be there. And for the most part, especially in the more central areas of Shenzhen, you will not see small motorbikes very often at all. Finally, these larger motorbikes, more expensive ones, are actually legal, but this is about the size of the engine and the cost of the motorbike. So the regulations require that you have a particularly expensive and therefore difficult to get hold of motorbike before you're actually allowed to ride on the road. And obviously you need licenses and insurance and so on before you can do that. So if you see a big motorbike go past me, a big Harley or a Kawasaki or something, then you're going to know that it's actually legal, because that guy has probably paid quite a lot of money for that motorbike. So there's a broader point to make here about regional differences. If you go to another city in China, you may find that motorbikes are gleefully riding all over the place. And in the case of bicycles, in somewhere like Beijing, bicycles are entitled to go on a larger variety of roads than they are in Shenzhen. So it really does depend where you go. If you're looking for a rule of thumb to follow, try to see what the majority of people are doing. Try to go with the flow. If most people are making a concerted effort to cycle on the pavement, then it's likely that there's a reason for that. Another area to consider in Shenzhen is electric bikes. So here are 2 examples of electric bikes, and based on my understanding of the rules for electric bikes in Shenzhen, one of these bikes would be okay and the other one would not. And this is all down to pedals. So one of the rules is that if your bike has pedals, your electric bike has pedals, that is okay, that is acceptable. If it doesn't, then it's an electric scooter, has no pedals, and it won't be accepted. So again, we go back to legislation and enforcement. If I don't say this, then you're all going to come up to me and say, hey, I saw a bike with no pedals and this guy was riding it and nobody stopped him. Well, yeah, you're going to see bikes with no pedals You're going to see bikes that used to have pedals and somebody broke the pedals off somehow. Again, the rules say one thing, enforcement creates a different environment. So just be aware if you're going to buy an electric bike that there are regulations about these. They're incredibly useful things to have. It's very hot right now. It's going to be hot for a few months more. And an electric bike means you don't have to put any effort into moving around. So it can save you from sweating. However, you've got to know that if your electric bike is too heavy, too powerful, or perhaps has no pedals, then it's possible that you're going to get stopped and told your bike is not appropriate. Also, it's worth pointing out that you stand out as a foreigner, so you're easier to notice. I'm not suggesting that someone would target you because you're a foreigner and try to impose some kind of fine on you because you're riding on the wrong kind of electric bike, but it's just worth noting that rules exist. You know, your bike can't be beyond a certain weight, it can't be over a certain power, and it does need to have pedals.